Okay, so today I want to talk about the issues that you run into that I think broadly could be described as context ops, the overhead around using agents for agentic development, for your go to market, for your generalized knowledge work where you're using some sort of, let's say we'll call it markdown files. You're using code, obviously, you're using the specific language. So your Rust, your Python, whatever. And then version controlling that software. The this you could say this is just an extension of DevOps. I think that's definitely an argument to be made. In fact, I've actually seen this framed as, or one of my clients framed it as, DevOps is a full time job. It's seeming to be that context ops is going to become a full time job. Is the discussion we had. But by and large, the overhead of using agentic development tools like your Claude Code, you want to say open code, whatever, you're basically just spitting off all this information all the time, and you're trying to keep track of it more often than not, or at least you should be keeping track of it using Git and the complexity and overhead and pain points that creates. The thing I just found, so the main topic of this video is the issue I ran into once I moved from solely one Git repo, only doing development on one machine, to setting up a virtual private server for myself, so I could so I could use Claude Code on the go, basically, and then having to manage the diffs and conflicts and all the overhead of just two computers or two machines. And then I guess the second part of this is the antidotes I've heard from my clients around them setting up context operating systems. So context OS is basically a context graph. Mine are the ones I have my clients with are all focused on go to market. So we take all your transcripts, your CRM data, internal positioning documents, whatever, and use that to generate a markdown based knowledge graph of your ICP, your product positioning, your product marketing, whatever those end deliverables end up being. Oftentimes it's entirely customizable. It effectively allows you to ship and learn significantly faster and go to market. But it's using Markdown and Claude Code. So the overlap between that agentic development and the issues we're finding with context operating systems are very similar. Okay, so what was the core problem that I experienced? It starts with the context you need is that I'm working on a command line tool for Claude Code that is basically meant to give it visibility into its own session data, into how the system has changed and evolved over time. So sounds like memory. It's not memory. I think the core trade-off with these agentic development tools is you get a ton of leverage. So you can write your specifications 20 times faster, or your product marketing 20 times faster, whatever, the code faster too. Anyways, I think by definition, you're getting the leverage. The trade-off is visibility, because you're not reading that white paper or that code yourself by hand more often than not. Anyways, the tool I built, Taste Matter, I just cut a new version last night. So right now, or actually, it's live now. So if you could check out the new version. But anyways, it indexes all of your session data and your file access and builds into essentially like an index. An index is a great index that allows Claude Code to kind of see like, hey, how has the system evolved and changed over time? Or how has the code base evolved and changed over time? That's the main value prop. I use it to restore context, to manipulate context all the time. It's super valuable, especially when I don't explicitly save my point in time with a context package. I could say, hey, what have I done on Taste Matter, for example, the tool itself? And it could say, oh, you're working on, you were messing around with a Tari app, and then you lost focus on that, and then you worked towards iterating on this command line, for example. It gives Claude Code the dictionary to do that, or quite literally, like a book has the outline in front. That's kind of like this. Anyways, I cut a new version to release a feature I'm calling graph execution. And this is more for people who have these context operating systems where you have a markdown based knowledge graph with front matter at the start of all these files. So maybe I can show you one. This example, this is one of the context packages I created when I was working on taste matter, excuse me. So this is like storing state of like, hey, what do we work on? What's the next Y? And you can see here it's like connected to a bunch of other nodes in this gigantic context graph. Um, that's what a context operating system is. Obviously, mine is like gigantic at this point. I've been working in here in a while, and actually there's some client graphs in here. But that gets to my point of how do you manage all this information and version control it, and like what's the right repository pattern to use? Do you version control everything? Do you ignore some stuff? How do you nest repositories? Do you use a monorepo? These are all big meta questions that tie into the main problem I was having today. So getting to the actual problem I had, I cut a new version that added this new functionality where it basically allows Claude Code to compute the graph itself. It's super cool, right? You can add, it'll got you go in and compute, write code and run it in a sandbox to compute this stuff, right? So the front matter. It makes it so instead of having to run like 10 grep queries to find a specific file or like a pattern you're looking for against the front matter, it'll do it in one or two. I got it down to, it was a 91% reduction is what I got in terms of like how many tool calls steps it took. Anyways, I wrote a post about it. Sandbox code execution goes brr, right? I thought it was cool. So people were like, hell yeah, great. I'm like, great, awesome, cool. And then I go and check my, it's this one. Where is it? Yeah, I go and check the public repository because this is where the skill is. So I have the skill in the command line, 2 different repositories, allows me to kind of control and lets people download the skill to use the command line most effectively. And I go, well, why is this here? There shouldn't be a release on the public repository. That doesn't make any sense. And then I went to the other repository. This is a whatever. I got another repository, and it's here now because I fixed it. But the version wasn't there, and I'm like, oh, well, what's happening? What had happened was a context problem that me using Claude Code and my Claude Code like checkout process didn't check or didn't catch automatically. So the reason this happened is not some like crazy convoluted engineering problem or anything like that, but something simple. And I want to highlight this because more often than not, the root cause of any seemingly super complex problem is like one thing misconfigured somewhere upstream. This happens more often than you think in like organizations where you think they should be like super squared away, perfect enterprise software, whatever, right? It happens. And what my version of this was as a solo engineer founder was I changed the repository names because I wanted this one to be the public one and I wanted this one to be my private one. Previously, this was just called Taste Matter. So what had happened was I didn't update the skill for Claude Code. I have a skill called, there it is, Taste Matter Release Ops that tells Claude Code, hey, here's the repository you should push to. Here's the CI/CD it's going to run through. It's going to test it on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS virtual machines in GitHub Actions. It's going to install it, make sure it works, and make sure that a Claude Code version in there can call it. Okay, cool, great. I spent 40 minutes, more or less. I had other things running at the same time. So the reason I realized was I was working on my virtual machine. So this is my virtual private server, and the agent in there was basically like, "Hey, I can't pull it down, buddy. Like, where is it? Where's the code, big guy?" And I literally like copy and pasted the thing in here. It's like, where is it? Because I was trying to look at something else related to it. While it's messing around and stashing changes and trying to fumble its way through fetching and rebasing and pushing and all this other stuff like that, I have a internal dashboard I'm building for myself basically. And literally it just lost the code. It didn't actually lose the code. But because it switched branches locally to and it figured out I had to do that, it just wiped all of the changes. So thank God the code was local here, or was in this session data, excuse me. But it wiped the changes for a complete different feature. And this was my mistake. I should have realized that saying, yeah, go for it, do whatever you need to do to fix it, was going to change it up, was going to impact the rest of the code locally because it's the same repository. But you can just see here, I'm like just losing my patience, and this is my fault, by the way. This is on me because you see, it's effectively what I was giving bad instructions. I was kind of being like, yeah, go make the changes, push them up, whatever. Codes here local on this machine, just to make sure it's in the repository. I was committed to the master, and then we can release the right version. This is why I harp on making it enumerate assumptions and prove it understands better. Because up until like right here, it didn't really, it doesn't intuit things. But it, like, if I wanted to anthropomorphize it, it did intuit that, oh, we just changed the names of this repository, and that's like the whole source of this problem. Meanwhile, it's like doing everything in God's green earth beyond just like the simplest possible solution. Right here. This is the thing. I was like, that's actually not at all what we need to do. So this is the new graph exec is the new feature, and I'm like, you did not push it up. It's not done. So then it's which starts trying to do this Git jujitsu, and it's just like completely. This is where I wasted like 40 minutes just waiting for this thing to like try and figure it out before I was like, this is actually not working. Because what it's trying to do in here, in this section, is it's basically trying to make like little line by line changes. I don't know why it thought to do that, because when I go down to here, it says I stopped it. I was like, prove to me. Yeah, it's also lighting tokens on fire. Anyways, I just had it ground itself. And I was like, hey, this is the actual architecture. It works. And I finally had the insights. I finally used my mind, my brain, to say, hey, I'm going to use I have a debugging complexity assessment scale that whenever Claude Code is kind of over engineering or trying to debug something in a way that I think is just dumb, it's backwards. I say, hey, it's this skill literally just says, just pause and like think about the problem and like what is the smallest thing you could do to fix it. And then from here, it makes a couple of changes that has to go up and done. Like this is the TAC process. So boom, done. I know for a fact, like this is partly me being dumb, partly me learning just how to do CI/CD better, how to think about Git better. Right? There's all this stuff where it's a lot of this is on me, but this is also part of a larger trend that I'm seeing, where agents spin off so much information all the time, and we're trying to like manage it. Um, when you use the agent to then manage the information that it is like spun off, it is just a recipe for disaster unless you do it in very specific, specialized ways. So I guess to share my learnings. Um, well, let's take a step back for a second. Actually, thinking about the Git in context problem at large, I've heard about companies that are like have so many agents running all the time in work trees and in virtual in containers and just everywhere all the time. It is becoming like untenable, even to use other agents to monitor and like approve changes, approve up PRs, whatever, right? To the point where I think we are like we will eventually really hurt, not hurt. We will push Git to its limits. Um, and I think that's the broader trend here. But I guess in terms of the practical steps that you can take away from this, um, make sure that you're one. I would say definitely create a skill to manage your Git cycles. So I have two. I have the context GitOps, um, and I have the specifically one for cutting releases. The other one I would say is make the agent prove it understands the assumptions it's making inherent to how it's treating a problem or like debugging a problem. I released a skill around this called the epistemic context audit. It basically has the agent enumerate, hey, this is what I think. These are my assumptions about this problem, and then like grades how well can actually know that thing. Epistemology is the study of what you can know. Um, then, um, so it's make the agent prove it, have specific skills for managing Git, and like the hard parts, like a release cycle, basically. But then I would also say I'm the strategy I'm gonna go with now probably is I need to so that thing I showed you where I was working on dashboard. I'm thinking I might make that a separate repository or a submodule or something where it's just not tied to something that is really has nothing to do with in regard to um, functionality. They don't talk to one another. It's just they're part of the same like business case, business project, whatever you want to call it. So that's how I'm gonna think about it. And I guess getting more to the um, multi-user coordination where I'm seeing with my clients. The big takeaway is the more people you add onto your context operating system, it doesn't get. It's not summative. That's the right word. Yeah, it's not summative. So one person, it's yeah. If you have one person on it, then you add another person. It's not twice as hard, or three persons three times as hard. It is like exponentials. Um, that is like the theoretical version of where if you have everyone pushing and pulling changes from the thing all the time, the only reason is not like a pure exponential all the way up is because most people on your system will not be pushing and pulling from it. Generally, you have power users that read and write from the thing all the time, and 80% of people just take the work that they're doing, whether it's around new positioning documents or code or whatever it is, and they're reading from it. So that makes it a bit more manageable. Now, I like example of this. I know I have, excuse me, I have a client called Pixie. Victor's their head of go-to-market. He's awesome. He's like their power user and like it's a word from open source, like benevolent dictator of the repository, managing the thing. And but I also know like they got their 20-person team or whatever the exact number is, like all up on Claude Code, all using the context OS on top of their main core product, which is their code base, right? And the problem is twofold. So it's easy because not a lot of people are pushing and pulling, but then you have also no idea how much local drift is happening. Like people are using it to do event planning and like whatever the like deliverables they're responsible for is. Then you get just a ton of drift. So and this by and large parallels most. But this by and large parallels DevOps pretty well. from my understanding, having never been a DevOps engineer. um, but I think this is different. If nothing else, just the sheer amount of information being processed. Um, and what I would say is, so number one, it's the amount of people, but most people can just read and write. That's the summary so far for the first two. And the third thing is, this is a new problem. Everyone's figuring it out, from the very top 0.1% when they're generating, I'm sure, a zillion times more code and context than I am for my systems, all the way to people just being like, what's Claude Code? They're going to eventually run into, well, I'd like to save my files, but I want to change them. How does this work? Right. So that's my story time of the context ops problem I had for myself, um, mostly around Git, but I'm happy to dive more into um, specific context graph oriented stuff if people would be interested in that. But yeah, I just wanted to share what the pain points are of modern agentic development, at least my experience, and how I'm going about fixing them, which by and large, it is the same principles of rubber ducky it, work through, work through the problem step by step, and slow down. Um, so I'll be releasing I'm happy to release the debugging complexity skill if people are interested in that. I find it super valuable. I use it for everything, not just this Git issue. So if you're interested in that, leave a comment. I'll push it up to one of the repositories I have up. But thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.